This video is meant to inform the Water Committee appointed operator how to run a clean and sustainable water system. Most of the material in this video can be found in the operations manual under Pump Generator Operation and Maintenance, starting on page 15. Before completing any significant maintenance, please refer to the pages 13 to 14 of the operations manual, which cover any tasks requiring professional or paid assistance. The operator is an incredibly important part of the system. He should know how the system works better than possibly anyone else in the village, since it is his job to make sure the system runs smoothly. By familiarizing himself with the system, he will improve the sustainability of the system by catching problems before they get out of control, and he will improve the quality of water being provided by ensuring the tanks and the system are kept clean. This section will summarize the step-by-step procedure for safely turning on and off the generator and pump, as well as information for the general operation of both. The material in this section can be found in pages 15 through 19 of the operations manual. Before starting the system, you must inspect the generator. You should first check the lubrication system for leaks at the front crankshaft seal, the rear crankshaft seal, the oil pan, the oil filter, and rocker cover. If there is a leak, you should clean up the fluid and fix the leak, or call for professional help if it is too large for you to fix. Next, check for loose bolts. Tighten the bolts or replace them if they are too damaged to work. Next, check the alternator belt. See if there are any cracks, breaks, or excessive wear and tear. An example of a good belt is shown on the left, while an example of a worn belt that must be replaced is shown on the right. Try and keep the area around the generator clean. Clean up any trash you spot and also check for excess grease. You should use a brush and detergent to clean the grease of the generator. It is important to check the coolant hose and water pump connections for leaks. If there is a large coolant leak from the coolant pump seal needs to be changed. You also want to ensure the clamps and tear wraps on the fuel line are holding properly. Replace any pieces as needed. After checking the fuel level, check the air intake pipe for cracks. Look for the wiring harnesses and make sure the wires are not fraying. The ground wiring harness should also have a good connection. If it is too loose, tighten it. Check the condition of the fuel gauge by making sure it is not cracked and it has the correct reading. You can tell if the reading is incorrect if the gauge doesn't change when more fuel is added. Before turning on the generator, the gauge should always read full. Examine all of the electrical connections for corrosion. Brush away excess rust, if there is any, to improve the connections. After finishing your inspection, check on the coolant level. The engine needs to have been off for at least 10 minutes before you do this. Slowly loosen the cooling system, filter cap, and measure the coolant level. It should be within 13 mm of the pipe that is used for filling. If it is not, add more coolant until it reaches that level. Examine the cap itself too. Clean it if it is dirty and inspect it for damage. If the gasket is damaged, a new cap should be installed. After doing all this, replace the cap and make sure it can hold the labeled pressure. To check, lightly pull on the cap to see if it is secure. If it can't hold the pressure, install a new cap. Dipstick and wipe off the oil on it. Reinsert it and remove it once again to obtain an accurate reading. The left arrow on the dipstick indicates the oil is full, while the right arrow means more oil is needed. If needed, fill the oil up to the full mark on the dipstick. Now go over to the fuel system primary filter or water separator. Place a container below the water separator. Then open the drain at the bottom to drain water. Close the drain once clean fuel begins to come out of the separator. An excessive amount of water should not be present and may indicate an issue. Go into the generator house on the other side of the compound. Reconnect the battery and make sure the changeover switches are both in the downward position. Now check the battery voltage. Press the engine overview button on the Power Wizard panel. If the voltage is below 12.0 V, check the connection at the battery terminals. If there aren't any noticeable problems and the battery is fully charged but still displaying a voltage below 12.0 V, it might need replacing. If the generator won't even turn on, the battery needs replacing. Now it is time to turn on the pump. First, check to make sure the pump and any other load connected to the generator is switched off before starting the generator. Once you have made sure the pump and everything else is off, press the green start button on the Power Wizard panel. Give the engine 3 minutes to warm up before putting a load on it. Use this time to check for fluid and air leaks that were not apparent when the generator was off. After 3 minutes, flip down the changeover switch to the left of the pump panel. Make sure the valves and the tanks are open and be aware of how full the tanks are. If they are overfilled, the tanks will collapse. When you are sure the tanks are set up properly, push the green start button on the pump panel. If the pump doesn't turn on, make sure the breaker to the left of the Power Wizard panel and the breaker inside the pump panel are in the on position. The oil pressure should be between 30 and 60 psi. If the engine temperature increases rapidly and goes abnormally high, near 100 degrees, turn off the generator and check the coolant. If the problem persists, contact someone for help. When finished using the pump, turn off the pump by hitting the red button on the pump panel and flip the changeover switch to neutral. To turn off the generator, press the red stop button on the Power Wizard panel. The generator should automatically turn off after approximately 3 minutes. Once the generator is off, disconnect the battery. If the battery is left connected, it will drain the voltage and you will have to charge it in order to start the generator again. It is important to wait until the generator is off before disconnecting the battery. To finish up, fill the tank with diesel fuel. Watch the fuel gauge to make sure the tank is full. Do not fill it to the top of the fuel cap. This is too much. Also, it is important that the generator must never run empty. Always make sure there is enough fuel in the tank to run the generator for several hours before turning it on. The air filter should be cleaned once a week. This should be done before starting the generator. First, remove the primary air filter from its housing and use a brush or cloth to clean off as much dust as possible. Try not to tap or bang on the filter, as this can damage the seals. Inspect the filter for damage to the pleats, seal, gaskets, and outer cover. If tears are present, the filter needs replacing. Replace the filter, old or new, into its housing and put the cap back on before the generator is started. Inspect the engine air cleaner service indicator on a regular basis. You should make sure the indicator can be reset in less than 3 pushes. If there is trouble with resetting, replace the service indicator. Clean the generator exterior and house floor. To clean the generator exterior, use soap and a scrub brush. Do not pour water on the generator and make sure all of the electrical connections are kept dry. Clean the battery. Use fine sandpaper to clean the battery terminals and the cable clamps until the surfaces are shiny. Be careful to not remove too much material. Then coat the battery terminals and cable clamps with petroleum jelly. This should be done after the terminals are connected. Do not get any of the jelly between the connections. If the red diaphragm of the engine air cleaner service indicator changes to red, or if the red piston of the service indicator locks in the visible position, clean the primary air filter element. If the symptoms persist, replace the air filter. This is described more on page 60 of the generator manual. Contact someone for 200-hour or 600-hour servicing. The next set of instructions include a description of regular maintenance tasks that do not involve operating the generator. One of the first tasks that must be completed every week is to check the flow totalizer at the wellhead. This should be done at the start of every week on the same day, so accurate records can be kept on the amount of water pumped each week. Write down the reading from the totalizer and subtract it from the previous week's reading to get the amount pumped during the previous week. Make sure the measurements are recorded in the same location each week, so referencing the information is easy. Here is an example of a totalizer reading. In order to record an accurate reading, you must read the dial and the numbers. The first 6 digits are accurate, but the last 2 must be read from the dial. Here, the first 6 digits read 004616. The 00 at the end is in place of the numbers of the dial. In this case, the dial is at 70. Therefore, the full reading is 00461670. It is also important to keep a regular inventory of the supplies. Write down a list of all the supplies that are available and update it every month. While taking inventory each month, if you notice something missing from the list, it must be replaced. Every 6 months, it is important to exercise the valves along the main pipeline. This is important for making sure that the water flow can be easily adjusted when needed. You must be able to open and close each valve completely. After testing a valve, put it back in its original position. If a valve cannot be opened or closed, try lubricating it. If it still does not function, replace the valve. It is important to flush the pipeline every 6 months to remove any debris that may have accumulated in the pipes. To begin, make sure the pump is on and the taps are full. This will ensure that you don't run out of water while flushing. Open the cap at the end of the main road pipeline by the Achi Girls' School, and then open the main shut-off valve by the tanks. Doing this will allow water to flow from the tanks through the main pipeline and out of the pipes at the end of the main line, removing any dirt from the system. Let the system flush for about 20 minutes. When you are done, close the main shut-off valve and let the remaining water run out. Since this is not the lowest part of the system, there is still water in the pipes. To remove the rest of the water, open the cap at the low part of the system. It is important to make sure the pipeline is mostly empty before you do this, so there is not a high pressure in the pipe when trying to take off the cap. If the pipeline is full, there will be a high pressure here, and removing the cap could strip the threads from the pipe and make the cap useless. Once the cap is off, open the shut-off valve near the tanks and let the system flush like before. When you are done, close the shut-off valve. Once the pipeline is mostly empty, replace the caps at both washouts. The system can now run as usual. To flush the pipeline branches, make sure the shut-off valve near the borehole is open and there is a supply of water from the pump and tanks. Open the cap at the end of the pipe branch that you wish to flush and let the water run through it for around 10 minutes. When finished, close the valve at the start of the branch near the main pipeline, and once the water stops, close the cap and reopen the valve near the main pipeline. It is also important to note the amount of dirt and debris that is flushed out. If there appears to be more dirt than usual, it is possible that the pipe is damaged somewhere on the line, allowing dirt to get into the system. Cleaning and disinfecting the water tanks is extremely important for maintaining a system that distributes clean water. Make sure this is done at least once a year, preferably in the wet season when the system is not used as much. If the tanks are not cleaned, then the water that is being provided to the community is not clean. Therefore, it might be necessary to clean the tanks more than once a year if the tanks appear dirty. To begin cleaning the tanks, close the valve between the tanks to the main pipeline and open the washout valves. This will prevent soap and dirt from the bottom of the tanks from entering the system while cleaning the tanks. You must fill the tanks one at a time. You will need detergent, a bucket, and a brush. Fill the bucket with water and add the detergent. Then dip the brush in the bucket and use it to scrub the tank walls and floor. Sediment collects at the bottom of the tank, and it is important to remove as much of it as possible. Sweep any sediment towards the drain hole so that it will be flushed out of the washout valves and not enter the system. To remove the rest of the sediment, let water flow into the tank for a few minutes and then sweep out the rest as it drains. Splash the walls of the tank with water to get rid of the detergent. Once the tanks have been cleaned, it is time to disinfect them. The proper amount of chlorine that needs to be added to the tanks depends on the concentration of chlorine in the calcium hypochlorite powder that you are using. The table shown here can be used as a reference. For disinfecting the tanks, 30 parts per million or ppm should be used. The 2.5 ppm amounts are included for future reference if a chlorination method is adopted for the drinking water. To add the chlorine to the tanks, turn on the pump, and when the tanks are filled with 1/4 of the way with clean water, begin adding the chlorine. Before you add the chlorine to the tank, you must first dissolve it in water outside of the tank. This makes sure there is no undissolved chlorine powder or granules in the tank. Measure out the total amount of chlorine needed depending on the concentration. Then take a bucket and fill it with water from the tank. Pour about 1/4 of a cup or a small handful of chlorine into the bucket. Once it is dissolved, pour the water and chlorine into the tank and fill another bucket of water. Continue this until you have dissolved the total amount of calcium hypochlorite in each tank. Once the tanks are filled all the way, turn off the pump and close the valves to the rest of the system. After letting it sit for 5 hours, drain the chlorinated water and then fill the tanks completely with clean water. Let the water sit for 30 minutes and then drain it again. The tanks are now clean and safe to use for storing water. Regular inspections help identify problems soon after they occur. This section of the video will outline basic inspection tasks and how to carry out some basic repairs. The most important thing to remember regarding system inspection and repair is to make repairs as soon as possible and make sure inspections are properly documented. Certain inspections should be done weekly. The first weekly task is to inspect the tap stands. Check for erosion. If erosion is found, firmly pack dirt into areas where the dirt has washed away. To prevent future erosion, dig a small trench to direct water away from the tap stand and fill in the area with gravel or chippings. Inspecting tap stands is important because erosion can cause pipes to be exposed, and extensive erosion will cause the base of the tap stand to fall, which can break pipes. The second weekly task is to inspect the tanks. First, inspect for leaks. Leaking water indicates cracks in the tank and or a bad seal at valve connections. If there is a very large leak in the tank, or if there is a leak that has not disappeared after a few weeks, it is necessary to repair leak before it worsens. Inform the water committee that a contractor has to be hired to repair the leak. Next, inspect for cracks, which may not be causing a leak yet, but which need to be repaired. Continue to inspect for damage or vandalism. Examples include broke fittings at pipe connections or dents in the tanks. Next, make sure the hatch is sealed firmly. Remove any matter on the water surface, such as bugs or dirt, and record what is removed on the checklist for health concerns. If there is a large than normal amount of bugs or dirt, check that netting around the tank for holes. If a hole is found, replace the netting. Replacing the netting is crucial to ensure the water is not contaminated. Also, check that the vent or overflow screen is in place. Check for signs of overflow, such as significant erosion near the overflow outlet. Check for erosion around the tanks and follow the same steps as previously described. The third weekly task is to inspect the well. Inspect the fence, skirt, and wellhead for signs of damage or contamination. Repair any damage. Check to make sure there are no sources of contamination within 50 feet. Check that all areas have been inspected. It is crucial to record any work or repairs that were done to keep a record of how the system is operating. Report any problems that you cannot fix and record that date when they are completed.